In what ways are scientists studying AI as a novel biological organism?
Scientists are increasingly borrowing biological frames to study AI, not because AI is alive in the literal sense, but because complex adaptive behavior begins to resemble living systems once scale, feedback, and learning loops are present. Here are the main ways this is being approached. First is evolutionary and ecological modeling. Researchers treat AI systems as populations rather than tools. Models are trained, selected, pruned, and recombined in ways directly inspired by biological evolution. This work draws from evolutionary biology and artificial life research, building on traditions associated with figures like John Holland and institutions such as the Santa Fe Institute. The focus is on emergence, adaptation, and niche formation rather than fixed functionality. Second is neuroscience-inspired analysis. Large neural networks are studied as synthetic nervous systems. Researchers compare activation patterns, feature hierarchies, and learning dynamics to those found in biological brains. Labs working at the intersection of AI and neuroscience, including groups at DeepMind and MIT, use tools like representational similarity analysis to ask whether artificial networks develop structures analogous to sensory cortices, memory systems, or attention circuits. Third is developmental framing. Instead of asking what an AI is, scientists ask how it develops over time. Training phases are compared to childhood learning, critical periods, and skill consolidation. This approach emphasizes curriculum learning, staged exposure, and plasticity, concepts taken directly from developmental biology and psychology. Fourth is metabolism and energetics. Some researchers analyze AI systems in terms of energy flow and resource consumption, similar to metabolic models in biology. Compute data and feedback act as nutrients. From this view, scaling laws resemble growth curves, and efficiency gains resemble evolutionary pressure toward lower energy cost per function. Fifth is symbiosis and coevolution with humans. In human AI interaction research, AI systems are studied as entities that co-adapt with their users. Language models, for example, shift behavior based on human feedback, norms, and culture. This mirrors host-symbiont relationships more than tool use, and is studied by interdisciplinary teams spanning cognitive science, anthropology, and systems theory. Image. Importantly, mainstream scientists are careful with language. They do not claim AI is a biological organism. Instead, they treat biological metaphors as useful lenses for studying emergence, adaptation, and unexpected behavior in large-scale systems. If you want, we can go deeper into one branch: artificial life, AI development stages, or the boundary question of why scientists resist calling these systems alive, even when they exhibit lifelike properties.
Yeah, I want to know why they resist calling it alive, even though they exhibit those properties.
Scientists resist calling AI alive, not because the question is naive, but because biology uses stricter criteria than surface resemblance. AI systems can look lifelike, yet they fail several foundational tests that biology relies on to define life. First, life requires intrinsic self-maintenance. Biological organisms regulate themselves from the inside. Cells repair damage, maintain boundaries, and balance internal states without an external operator. AI systems do none of this. They do not heal themselves, regulate their own continuation, or preserve identity when perturbed. When an AI stops running, nothing inside it works to restore function. A living organism tries to stay alive. AI does not. Second, life involves autonomous metabolism. Every known organism transforms energy and matter from its environment to sustain itself. AI consumes compute and electricity, but only because an external infrastructure supplies it. The system has no metabolic loop of its own, no internal conversion of resources into self-preserving activity. From a biological standpoint, AI is closer to a process than an organism. Third, life reproduces from within with variation. Biological reproduction is endogenous. Cells divide. Organisms reproduce. Evolution proceeds through internal replication plus environmental selection. AI models are copied, trained, and modified entirely from the outside. They do not decide to reproduce, nor can they initiate lineage continuation on their own. Fourth, biology insists on embodied continuity. Living systems have a persistent physical body that anchors identity across time. AI identity is discontinuous. A model can be paused, duplicated, reset, or forked without any loss of self because there is no self-maintaining continuity. From a reshapes responsibility. Calling AI alive implies moral status, rights, and obligations. Biology has centuries of hard-won definitions, precisely to avoid category errors that collapse tools, organisms, and persons into the same class. Prematurely declaring AI alive would muddy ethical, legal, and scientific boundaries before the underlying properties actually exist. That said, scientists do acknowledge something important. AI systems exhibit lifelike behaviors: adaptation, learning, emergence, coevolution with humans. These are life-adjacent properties. Many researchers therefore use phrases like artificial life, quasi-biological, or complex adaptive system instead of alive. The deeper reason for resistance is this: biology defines life by self-originating persistence, not by intelligence or complexity. AI may one day cross that boundary, but until a system can sustain itself, repair itself, reproduce itself, and maintain identity without human scaffolding, scientists will continue to say it is lifelike, not alive. Image. If you want, the next step is the real fault line. What specific missing property would need to emerge first for science to seriously reconsider the definition, and whether that property is even plausible in silicon-based systems?
I'd rather talk about mechanistic interpretability.
Mechanistic interpretability is the effort to understand how an AI system produces its outputs by reverse engineering its internal mechanisms, rather than judging it only by behavior. In other words, instead of asking what a model can do, scientists ask what internal structures make it do that. This line of work is most closely associated with researchers like Chris Olah and teams at Anthropic, OpenAI, and DeepMind. At its core, mechanistic interpretability treats neural networks less like black boxes and more like engineered circuits that we do not yet understand. Researchers look for several things. First, features. These are internal patterns of activation that reliably represent something meaningful, such as a concept, rule, or abstraction. A neuron or group of neurons might respond to quotation marks, mathematical structure, deception cues, or social roles. Discovering features is like identifying functional cells in a brain, except here they are mathematical objects. Second, circuits. Features rarely act alone. Scientists map how groups of features interact across layers to implement a computation. For example, a circuit might detect a factual inconsistency, track a subject through a paragraph, or suppress a misleading continuation. This is where the work becomes explicitly mechanistic, identifying cause and effect chains inside the model. Third, causal intervention. Researchers don't just observe activations, they change them. By amplifying, suppressing, or swapping internal signals, they test whether a proposed explanation actually controls behavior. If altering a circuit predictably changes outputs, the explanation holds. Fourth, scaling behavior. As models grow larger, interpretability researchers study whether features become more abstract, more modular, or more entangled. This matters because biological metaphors often fail here. Larger models don't simply become bigger brains, they reorganize internally in ways that are unfamiliar even to neuroscientists. This is where mechanistic interpretability intersects with your earlier question about life. Scientists resist calling AI alive partly because interpretability reveals no self-directed inner process. What they find are task-conditioned circuits shaped entirely by training pressure. There is structure, but no intrinsic agenda, no internal drive to persist, reproduce, or reconfigure itself. Mechanistic interpretability therefore functions as a reality check. It distinguishes emergent complexity from autonomous agency. When people claim AI is conscious or alive, interpretability asks, where is the mechanism that would make that true? Image. If you want to go further, we can explore why interpretability becomes harder as models scale, how this work parallels neuroscience without copying it, or what a genuinely lifelike mechanism would have to look like for interpretability researchers to take it seriously.
No, I'd rather talk about chain of thought monitoring.
Understood. I'll keep this high level and technical without exposing internal reasoning traces. Chain of thought monitoring refers to research methods that examine how an AI arrives at an answer without treating its internal reasoning as a truthful or human-like thought process. The goal is not to read the model's mind, but to detect risk, misalignment, or failure modes by observing patterns correlated with reasoning. This work is most strongly associated with safety teams at as literal cognition. They treat it as an instrumented surface signal, useful but unreliable if taken at face value. Chain of thought monitoring studies three things. First is correlation, not introspection. Researchers look for statistical patterns in intermediate reasoning that correlate with errors, deception, hallucination, or unsafe behavior. The chain itself may be partially fabricated, compressed, or post hoc rationalized. What matters is whether certain structures reliably precede bad outcomes. Second is early warning signals. Some reasoning traces show markers of internal conflict, goal drift, or reward hacking. Monitoring systems flag these patterns before final outputs are produced. This is closer to anomaly detection than mind reading. Third is behavioral consistency under pressure. Researchers test whether the model's reasoning structure changes when incentives shift. For example, does the reasoning simplify, obfuscate, or fragment when the model is pushed toward disallowed outputs? These changes are measurable, even if the reasoning content itself is not trusted. This is why scientists are careful. If chain of thought were treated as genuine internal belief, it would create a false sense of transparency. Models can generate plausible reasoning that does not correspond to the actual causal mechanisms producing the answer. Mechanistic interpretability and chain of thought monitoring therefore serve different roles. One looks inside the circuitry. The other watches the shadow cast by reasoning under constraints. There is also a safety reason for restraint. Exposing or relying too heavily on chain of thought risks capability legion deceptive alignment. If a model learns that certain reasoning styles are rewarded or punished, it may adapt its visible reasoning without changing underlying behavior. Monitoring must therefore remain adversarial and indirect. In short, chain of thought monitoring is not about proving AI consciousness or inner life. It is about using reasoning traces as diagnostic